We have finally seen all the cards from Aetherdrift, and whether you love the set or hate it, there are some seriously powerful cards that you should be aware of. So let's break down the 10 most expensive cards from the main set of Aetherdrift as we're exiting spoiler season as an indicator of what cards people are most excited about. Starting off with number 10, it's Burnout Bashtronaut, a 1-cost red 1/1 with menace that starts your engines and lets you pump 2 mana into it to give it +1/+0 until end of turn as many times as you want. Then it gains double strike when you hit max speed. This is probably the most aggressive speed card in the entire set, allowing you to start your engines on turn 1, and thanks to menace makes it easy to increase your speed turn after turn. So it's a pretty good enabler for the speed mechanic, but its double strike is also no joke, especially when you mix it with the menace and the ability to pump it up. Later in the game, this can become a threat once you hit that max speed threshold, which again will be pretty easy using this card. The mix of this being a pretty powerful enabler mixed with a pretty decent payoff means that I'm confident that if there's a speed deck in standard, this will probably be the card that enables it and will be a very powerful part of the deck. And that's a big reason why it's going for $14.64 right now. If there's a speed deck, it'll definitely be going in it, but if there's not, I really don't see a place for it to go. Number 9 is Oviya Automech Artisan, a 4-cost legendary green 1/2 that gives all creatures attacking your opponents trample, including your opponent's creatures that may be attacking a different opponent in something like Commander. Then it lets you pay 1 green mana and tap it to put a creature or vehicle straight from your hand onto the battlefield. And if you put an artifact this way, it gets 2 +1/+1 counters. This is a card that puts Elvish Piper to shame, and honestly seems like a super fun commander. I love cards like Joda who can cheat out things for way too cheap, and this can do that turn after turn and give giant creatures that don't have trample for some reason trample, even if they're not yours, which also seems like a really interesting dynamic in multiplayer formats. Even if you're not running it as a commander, it's still a powerful way to cheat out creatures if you run a bunch of big creatures, and is a strictly better Elvish Piper, except for being legendary, so you can't have multiple of them, so that's an easy swap too. With all of that in mind, it's currently pre-ordering for $16.44, but as with all pre-order prices, that's likely to go down when the set comes out, but of course nothing is guaranteed and it could shoot up in price if it sees a bunch of play. Number 8 is Webstrike Elite, a 2-cost 3/3 with reach, although it is double green, that you can cycle for X and 2 green. When you do, you get to destroy an artifact or enchantment with mana value X. This is a pretty simple card, but one that I think has some interesting potential. On its face, it seems like a pretty simple creature, but the ability to cycle it away and blow up an artifact or enchantment while replacing the card in your hand seems solid. Mix that with the fact that cycling is an ability, meaning it's much harder to counter, and you end up with a pretty interesting card that can always just be another creature you slam down or a card you cycle away with X = 0 if you don't need the removal, but also a tool that can remove annoying permanents against more controlling decks that may be wanting to counter your removal. Right now, the card is hovering around $16.61. Again, we're still pretty early, so I don't expect this price in particular to stick, but it does indicate that people are at least interested in this card, and again, we're using price here as an indicator of excitement, as most of these will fall, but often fall in order. So this may stay as the 8th most expensive card, but at a lower price. Number 7 is Unstoppable Plan, a 3-cost blue enchantment that untaps all of your non-land permanents at your end step. This card seems really interesting, because it makes me think of cards like Seedborn Muse and Wilderness Reclamation, but those untap lands and this does not. But this only costs 3 mana, and I think it still has a ton of potential. If you have non-land mana generation on things like Mana Rocks or Llanowar Elves, this will give you extra mana to hold up on other people's turn. If you have a lot of creatures that tap to do something, or in Commander just have a commander with a tap ability, this lets you use those abilities twice. If you want to be aggressive with your creatures and not risk the crackback, this also gives your creatures pseudo vigilance, and if you have cards that enter tapped, this lets you use those cards much faster. The point I'm trying to make is that this card can do a lot in a lot of different ways for a lot of different decks, and it only costs 3 mana. For all of those reasons and more, it's pre-ordering for $17.67. Number 6 is Vnwxt Verbose Host, a 2-cost blue 0/4 that starts your engine, gives you no max hand size, and doubles your card draw once you hit max speed. Where Burnout Bashtronaut was a great enabler for speed and a decent payoff, this is a terrible enabler outside of starting the mechanic, as it has 0 power itself, but a crazy payoff. Even without other cards to draw you cards, this doubles the card you draw at the start of your turn, and a 2-drop that draws you an extra card each turn would be pretty solid on its own, but this also works for every Ristic Study trigger, every Brainstorm, every source of card draw. But of course you need to enable it, and I think whether this is one of the best cards in the set will come down to how easy it is to get to max speed. If this is the only card in your deck that starts your engine, the fastest you can get to max speed is 2 turns after, and that may feel very clunky. Also, did I mention it's legendary? This could easily be a great mono blue draw deck that just keeps its hand full and controls the board a bit, although I think it'll be more popular in decks rather than helming them. Either way, it's currently pre-ordering for $17.93 on TCGPlayer. Speaking of TCGPlayer, it's the place I get all of my pricing data for videos like this, and where I get a lot of my cards, so I've partnered up with them. If you use my link in the description of this video, you can help directly support the channel when you pick up cards like the ones in this video or anything from their giant marketplace. Either way, let's jump back to the video. Number 5 is Sab-Sunen Luxa Embodied, a 5-cost green and blue legendary 6/6 that has reach, trample, and indestructible, but can't attack or block unless it has an even number of counters on it. Then during your first main phase, you put a +1/+1 counter on it and draw 2 cards if it ends up with an odd number of counters. This is obviously a reference to Bounty of the Luxa, and in normal play will come down and be able to block right away. Then on your next turn, it'll get a counter and you'll draw 2 cards but not be able to attack with it. And then on the turn after that, you'll get another counter, no cards, and be able to finally swing with it. To really maximize this card, you want to proliferate or put another counter after you get the draw trigger. This will let you swing on that turn, but also set you up to draw 2 more cards on the next turn, which sounds great and is pretty easy to do in any deck that cares about counters, which is why this is going for $18.83. It's just a really solid card that can also be your commander. Number 4 is Loot the Pathfinder, a 5-cost green, blue, and red legendary 2/4 with double strength, vigilance, and haste, and it has 3 exhaust abilities, meaning you can only activate them once for as long as you control loot. You can pay a green and tap it to add 3 mana, you can pay a blue and tap it to draw 3 cards, and you can pay a red and tap it to deal 3 damage to any target. Again, these are all exhaust abilities, meaning you can only do each ability once, but if you flicker loot, you can reuse all of these abilities, especially because it has haste. There's also Elvish Refueler from Aetherdrift that lets you reuse 1 exhaust ability per turn, which is an interesting include if you decide to run loot as your commander. The 3 abilities are powerful. It has vigilance, letting you take advantage of the double strike and still activate an ability every turn, and of course the haste lets you use one of loot's abilities right away, which is a massive upside. All of that leads to loot going for $19.77, but we'll have to see how much play he actually gets. Number 3 is Ketramose, the New Dawn. Another Amonkhet god, it's a 3-cost black and white 4/4 with menace, lifelink, and indestructible that can't attack or block unless there are 7 or more cards in exile, which is good because a 4/4 menace, lifelink, indestructible creature would be crazy at just 3 mana. But then whenever you're exiling 1 or more cards from the battlefield or graveyards during your turn, you lose a life and draw a card, turning basic exile removal into cantrips and cards like Relic of Progenitus into turn after turn card draw. This honestly just has so much potential. Yes, it can be a commander, but I could also just see control decks wanting to run this because they're already exiling cards from graveyards and the battlefield. It's a really awesome and powerful card, and it's going for $22. Number 2 is Radiant Lotus, an artifact that lets you tap and sack any number of artifacts to have target player add 3 mana for each sacked artifact. This is a really interesting card that turns artifacts you have laying around into Black Lotuses, and seems especially good in decks that are going to make a lot of token artifacts like foods, clues, maps, and treasures. While 6 mana is a lot, if you have just 2 artifacts you don't need, or maybe even want to sack, it immediately pays itself off as you can use this the turn it comes down, unlike a lot of other effects that make a lot of mana all at once that often enter tapped. This is obviously good with treasures, but it's even better with foods, clues, bloods, and maps, where it takes artifacts that normally don't generate mana at all and makes them 3 times better than a treasure. I think generally if your deck wants to be running an Academy Manufactor, you probably also want to be running this card, and so it's pre-ordering for $38.01. Finally, number 1 is the Aetherspark, a really unique card being both a planeswalker and an equipment. It can't be attacked while attached, and gets loyalty counters equal to the damage dealt whenever the attached creature deals combat damage to anything, letting it get tons of loyalty very quickly while being unable to be attacked. It attaches itself through its +1, which also puts a +1/+1 counter on the creature, and then can -5 to draw 2 cards, or -10 to add 10 mana. This card feels really good, with it coming down, immediately attaching itself to a creature to go up to 5 loyalty, and protecting itself from being attacked, and then that creature can swing in, put 4 or 5 counters on this, and you'll often be getting 10 mana on the very next turn. You can even swing on that next turn to get the final counters you need if you didn't get up to 10 on the previous turn, or just want some extra loyalty to keep it around after you -10. And even if you don't get up to 10 counters, drawing 2 cards is still great, and you can probably do it turn after turn, and this is a colorless card that can easily slot into any deck that has creatures. When you consider all of that, it makes sense that the card is pre-ordering for $39.83. It's honestly just a crazy card. Those are the current top 10 most expensive cards from Aetherdrift as we've exited spoiler season. Again, these are all pre-order prices that are likely to fluctuate, but give a good idea of the most anticipated cards. I'll be posting a pinned comment on release day with prices from that day, so you can see where things landed by the time we got to release if you're watching this video in the future. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, you can check out this video where I talk about 5 precons that are great to pick up right now, or this video that YouTube is recommending just for you.